Hello Divination and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to show you step by step how to use column outlines to emphasize your Divi design grid. This is the final result we're aiming to achieve. So without wasting a lot of time, let's dive in and let's get started. All right, so the first thing we need to do is to log into our WordPress admin dashboard and create a brand new page. So I'm going to come over here to pages and click on add new. Next, I'm going to give this page a name. So I'm just going to call this Divi design grid. And then I'm going to click on use Divi builder. And for this, we're going to build from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and click on build from scratch. And then we're just going to close this for now. Next, we're going to come over here now to the section settings, because this is where we need to adjust our horizontal and vertical overflow. All right, so I'm going to click here on advanced, and then I'm going to come over here to visibility. Next, I'm going to click here on horizontal overflow. Now, as you can see, by default, it's set to default. We want this to be set to hidden. And we also need to do the same on the vertical overflow. So I'm going to set this to hidden as well. And then we're going to save. Next, we're going to add our column structure. So I'm going to click on this plus button, and we need 2 equal columns. I'm going to select this. Now, before we add any modules, we need to go into our rows. So I'm going to click here on this gear icon to go into my row settings. So next, I'm going to come over here to design, sizing. So the first thing we need to do here is to set our width and our maximum width to 100%, because by default it's set to 80%. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to drag this slider all the way up to 100%. And for the maximum width, I'm also going to set this to 100%. And for the row alignment, we're going to align this to the right. Now let's go to spacing. So we're just going to collapse this and then choose spacing. So here we need to add our margin of 200 pixels right there on the top. And for the padding, we need to set this to 47%, and this needs to be on the left side. Okay, so make sure you add the 47% on the left. Now, while we're here, we also want to make sure that our design looks great on different mobile devices. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add different sizes to different screen options. So I'm going to click here on this little icon and then click on the tablet. So on the tablet, we need to set this at 6%. So I'm going to go in and manually add 6%. Now we also need to add the same value on the right as well while we're on the tablet. So we're going to add 6% as well. Now let's head over to the phone. So on the phone, we need to add 10% on the left padding. And on the right, this needs to be 10% as well. Okay, great. So pretty much we've added all our sizes and everything looks okay now on different mobile screens. So the next thing we need to do now is to add a border. So I'm going to come over here to our border, and we are going to add a border to the top and the bottom. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing I'm going to do here is to add my top border. So by default, we won't have any lines added to this. So we want to make sure that this is set to 4 pixels. So I'm just going to set this to 4 pixels. Okay, so that's great. Next, you need to add the color. So I'm going to click here on this eyedropper tool and paste my color in here. Now, the colors that I'm going to use throughout this tutorial, I'm going to leave them in the comments box below, or I'll also add a link to the blog post, which will have all the steps as well in written form. Okay, so now that we've added this, the next step now is to add the bottom border. So we're going to come back to the top here, click on the bottom border, and this needs to be 4 pixels as well, just like the other one. And I'm also going to use the same color. So I'm going to come over here and paste my color like that. All right, so now we have our colors both on the top and the bottom. Now we need to go into our column settings. So I'm going to come back over here to content, and we're going to start off with column 1. So click on this gear icon, go to design, spacing, and this is where we need to add 12% top bottom, and we also need to add 3% left and right. So you can also use this chain, because the chain applies the same value on both sides, and when you make a change, the change will be applied pretty much across. All right, so now that we have this, now we also need to go into column 2 settings. So we just need to click here on this little arrow. This will take us back to our columns. Click on the gear icon and then click on design. So now we're working on the second column. So again, like what we did before, just click here on spacing and add your value, which is 12%. And we want this both to the top and the bottom. And notice that now I've used this chain icon. Next, I'm going to also add left and right padding. And again, I'm going to use the chain. So now that we've added our sizes, the next step now is to start adding all our modules. So I'm going to go ahead now and hit save and save one more time. To add our modules, all we have to do is to click on this plus button, and the first module I need to add here is a text module. So I am going to search for it and select it. All right, so as you can see, we have some dummy text in here. So we need to add our own text. Okay, so I'm going to add my text by replacing what I have in here. And I also need to set this to heading 2. So I'm going to highlight it, come over here to paragraph and set this to heading 2. All right, so now that I've set my heading, I need to now go into our heading 2 settings and change the styling of that heading. All right, so let's click here on this design, and then we're going to go here to our heading text. And remember, we set it to heading 2, so I'm going to click on heading 2. So for our font, we're going to use Source Code Pro. So I'm going to search for it. And by the way, it is free. So I'm going to go ahead and select Source Code Pro. Next, on the font weight, I'm going to set this to bold. And we also need our text color. So what we're going to do is to click here on this eyedropper tool. Now, it's important that when you add colors that have transparency, you need to drag the slider down first. And then in this case, I'm going to use a specific color. Now, if you want to use the exact same color, I will leave a link to the post in the show notes below where you'll get all those colors and sizes. All right, so now that I've added my color, the next part here is to set our size. So I'm going to come over here and paste my value here for the size, which is going to be 4VW. Next, we're going to add some letter spacing, and this is going to be 5 pixels. All right, so moving on, we need to add a text shadow. So we're going to go and choose this one right here. And now that we've chosen this, we need to add our horizontal length. So I'm going to come over here and set it to 0.05. And then over here, we're going to set it to 0.07. Okay. Now, as we can see, the color here doesn't look great. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our own color. So I'm going to scroll down here, click on this eyedropper tool. And as you can see, it has transparency set to it. So I'm going to drag the slider all the way up because the color I'm going to add is a solid color. So there we go. So you can see here, it's very subtle, but it looks really nice. All right. So now that I've added my color, the next part now is to add our vertical motion. So to do that, I am going to come over here to advanced and then click on scroll effects. So make sure you activate enable vertical motion. And then we're going to start adding our values. So for the viewport here, we're going to set this to 2. And our midpoint here is okay at 0. And then here we're going to set this as -2. And then we're going to save. Now it's time to add our second text module. So I'm going to click here on this plus button, search for my text module and select it. And I'm going to add a paragraph of text in here. But of course, in your case, you can add whatever text you need to in that text module. All right, so moving on, I am going to choose my font now for my text. So I'm going to come over here to design and then click on text. So for my font here, I'm going to choose Source Code Pro, which is the same font that I used earlier on. And then I'm going to set my size, but it's just going to be very subtle. I'm going to set this to 15 pixels. And for my text line height, I'm going to set this to 2 EM. Okay. Now let's head over and set our vertical motion. So I'm going to click advanced, scroll effects, and making sure you have vertical motion selected, enable it. And over here on the viewport bottom, I'm going to set this to 2. And I'm also going to set this to -2, just like what I did before, and then save. All right, so the next thing is to add a button. So I'm going to click here on this plus button and search for my button. In fact, it's right here. I'm going to choose my button. And for my button here, I'm just going to label this read more. There we go. But of course, in your case, you can add whatever text you want on the button. Now, don't forget, you also need to add your URL. So in this case, I'm just going to add a basic URL here. But in your case, you need to make sure you add a link that goes to a specific page. All right, so now that we have this all set, now we need to customize our button and really make it look like our own design. So I'm going to come over here to the design tab, click on button, and we need to activate use custom styles for button. All right, so now that this is activated, the next step now is to add our button text color. So I'm going to click here on this eyedropper tool and paste my color in here. And I also need to set my radius. So I'm going to scroll down here until I find my border radius. And at the moment it's set to 3 by default. So we want to get rid of the radius altogether. So I'm going to set it to 0. Okay, so moving on, we're also going to add our button font. So let's go ahead and do that. So our button font, I think, is further down here. Oh, here we go. So we're also going to use the same font that we used earlier on, which is the source code Pro. Next, we are also going to show our icon. So I'm going to set this to yes, and icon placement needs to be on the left. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to the left. And this is going to be a basic arrow. Okay, so it's going to be this arrow. And then only show icon on hover. Let's set this to no. Okay, so which means our icon is always going to show. Now let's further customize our button by adding some spacing around this. So I'm going to click here on spacing, and let's go into the padding. So all we're going to do here is to add 20 pixels both to the top and the bottom. And then we're going to add 50 pixels to the left and the right. So now you can see this button here looks great and it has more breathing space. So this button also needs vertical motion. So I'm going to now come over here to advanced, scroll effects, activate vertical motion, and I'm going to set this to 2. And over here, I'm going to set this to -2. There we go. So I think that looks great. So now we can go ahead and save. Next, we're going to add an image module to column 2. So I'm going to click on this plus button and search for image. And here it is. So now I need to choose an image from my media library by clicking over here. So as you can see, I've got quite a few images here. I'm going to go ahead and select this one here. And note the size is 1000 by 1000 pixels. So if you want something that's similar to this design, you need to use these same dimensions. So I'm going to click upload an image. Next, I'm going to come over here to the design tab, sizing, and I'm going to force full width. So as you can see, our image here is in a rectangle format. Now we need a circle. So to achieve that, we need to scroll down here to our border. And for our rounded corners, we're going to set this to 50 VW. Now notice what happens here. We now have a full circle. So our design is in a full circle. All right, so the next step now is to add a box shadow. So I'm going to come over here, choose box shadow, and I'm going to go with this design here. All right, so let's go ahead and add our box shadow horizontal position. So for our horizontal position here, we're going to set this to 30 pixels. And then for our vertical, this needs to be 30 pixels as well. And then finally, we are going to add our color. And this color here has transparency. So I'm just going to paste my values between these brackets, just like that. Okay, so you can see now we have consistency with our colors. This is similar to the color that we have here on the top, which makes our design look really cool. All right, so the next step now is to come over here to advanced, scroll effects, and we also need to add vertical motion. So I'm going to activate it, and we're going to add 2 and -2 here for the top. There we go. All right, so that's looking great. So for our middle trigger, we're just going to leave everything as it is on 0. And then we're going to save. So as you can see, we took a bit of time to design this. So if you wanted to create the next part of content, you would need to recreate this all over again. But we can easily duplicate this and save ourselves a lot of time. Okay, so let's duplicate the entire row by just clicking on this button here. And then we can start working on the part that we've duplicated here. Okay. All right, so all you have to do now is to go in and change this text because, of course, it's identical to what we have there on the top. So we're going to go in, change our heading here and save. We can also change this text here if we want to. And now let's change this image by coming over here, and we're going to change this image and choose this one right here, upload an image, and then we're going to save. So we want to also do one more. So let's duplicate this as well. Now let's go ahead and change this information. So let's start with the image this time. So the image I'm going to use is this one. Now notice that the size of my image is pretty much the same. So we're going to save, go into our title and change the title as well. So now we have just quickly duplicated our first row, and now we have a bunch of content showing here, and it also has all our animations that we've just created. So what we need to do now to the bottom margin, and this is to the last one that we've just added, we need to go into our row settings here and click on design, spacing, and we need to add a bottom. We need to add a bottom margin of 200 pixels. So I'm just going to activate this chain here just to add the same value to the bottom, just to give this a bit of breathing space, and then save. All right, so the next step we need to do here is to add our column outlines, which are going to simulate our grid. So to do that, I'm going to click here on this little icon to show our layers. And this is where I need to add my new section. So I'm going to click here on this plus button, and here is our new section. So the next part, or the next stage, is to add our column structure. So to do that, I want to click here on regular. And for our column structure, we need to have this one right here. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. So as you can see, this is now my section that I'm working on. I'm just going to go ahead and rename this to grid. And then I'm going to drag this above what we were working on like that. Okay, so now our grid here is at the top, and what we've been working on is now on the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to scroll all the way to the top now. So now that we have this in place, I don't need the layers anymore. So let's go in now and start working on our rows. So I'm going to click here on this gear icon, click on design, sizing. So first of all, we need to activate use custom gutter width. And then for our custom gutter width, I'm going to set this to 1. So our gutter width is the space between the columns. Okay. Next, we also need to equalize the column height. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And for our width, we need to set this to about 90. So I'm going to set this to 90. And for maximum width here, we're going to set this to 100. Next, we're going to come over here to spacing. And what we need to do is to add a padding of 0, both to the top and the bottom. And then we need to come over here to advanced position. And what we need to set here is an absolute position. So we're going to come over here, choose absolute. And we also need to align this to the center. All right, so now we need to go to each and every column here and add some CSS. So let's start with the first one here. So I'm going to click on this gear icon, click on advanced. And then we're going to come over here to custom CSS, and in the main elements, we're going to paste this CSS code. All right. So now after you've added this, what you need to do is to go to each and every one of these and do the same. Go to your custom CSS and add it in here. Let's move on to the third one. Custom CSS, add it here. Advanced. Custom CSS. So as you can see here, it's pretty much easy to go in and add the custom CSS. Okay, so once you've added all the custom CSS, the next step now is to go into our column 1 settings, and we need to add our top and bottom padding. So I'm going to click here, and to add our top and bottom padding, we need to go into this design, spacing, and we are going to add it as 150 VH. Okay. Next, we're going to come over here to our border. And what we're going to do is to add a left border, which is going to be 5 pixels. And for our style here, I'm going to set it to dashed. And then we're also going to add a color to this. And you're going to notice that the color we're going to add here is a similar color that we've been using throughout our design. just to maintain the consistency. So you can see here it has been added right there, which is fantastic. So that's our column 1. Next, we need to go into column 2. So I'm going to go back over here, go into our column 2 settings. And this time we need to add a background. So I'm going to come over here to background, and I'm going to click on this plus button to add my background color. So now you can see I've added my background, but of course you can't really see it because it's right there at the top. Next, we're going to come over here to design, border, and we're going to add a right border. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. And this time our right border is going to be 4 pixels. Okay, we also need to give it a color. So I'm going to come over here, paste my color in place. And for the border style, we're going to make it solid. Now let's go to our column 3. So I'm going to click on this gear icon. So this time we also need to add a border, but this border is going to go to the right. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to click here on design, border, set this to the right. Next, I'm going to add my border color by clicking here, but this time our border is going to have some transparency. So just drag the slider down, and then we need to paste our values in here, just like that. And this one here needs to be dashed for the border style. Great. All right, so now that I've added my styles for border 3, it's time now to go to the 4th column. So I'm going to go back, go to column number 4, click on design, border, and this needs to be a right border as well. Let's set our color. I'm going to paste it in here. And by the way, if you want to use the exact same colors as I'm using throughout this tutorial, I will leave a link to that in the show notes below. All right, so I'm going to go ahead now and set this to 4. And then we're going to move on to our final one, which is column 5. And again, we're going to come over here to design, border, and our border here is going to be on the right as well. So for the width, it's going to be 4 pixels. And then I'm going to add my color, which has some transparency. Paste it in here like that. And the style for this is going to be dashed like that. So that's looking great. So I'm going to go back over here because this time we need to add a divider to column 1 and column 2. So I'm going to save all this. So over here on column 1, with my layers open, I'm just going to collapse this and add my new module. And as I mentioned, this needs to be a divider. So I'm going to search for my divider module here. And here where it says show divider, we want to say no. So we're going to save that. And we need to add this column to column 2 as well. So I'm going to drag my module to column 2. All right, great. So now that I have my divider, I'm going to just publish this page. So let's preview this design by first saving and exiting the Visual Builder. So I'm going to come over here and exit the Visual Builder. And here's our design. So there you have it. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up and do follow us on our social media platforms. By doing so, you'll be notified every time we release new tutorials. Until next time, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.